The first thing I'd like to do is to go over the user interface of GIMP, just so that people can be familiar with where things are and what certain parts of the interface might mean. Your interface might look a little bit different to mine. You can customize the interface quite a bit. There's different color themes and icon themes and that, but for the most part, things should look generally similar to this. I'm going to create a new blank document to work on for the sake of demonstrating what some of the tools that I'm familiar with and that I think will be useful can do. So we're going to start here with the toolbox. If for some reason you can't see your toolbox, you can go to Windows and Toolbox, and that generates your toolbox for you. Within your toolbox, you have a smaller window known as your tool options window. You can drag this out and have it be separate, or you can anchor it into the toolbox window. These little icons here represent all the different tools available to you in GIMP. If you click on one, you'll see the different options appear, and you can customize the different options for each tool as you go through them. I'm not going to go through all of the tools, but I'm going to go through the ones that I find the most useful. So the first set of tools are categorized as your selection tools. So you have a rectangular select tool, so you can select part of the image that you're working with. You can adjust it using these controllers on the screen. And then within the tool options, you have the option to feather the edges, round the corners, and you can change quite a few settings here. You won't deal with most of these. The one that might be useful is dealing with this fixed option. So you can do a fixed aspect ratio, a fixed width, a fixed height, or a fixed size. So an aspect ratio will be presented as a ratio. So for example, a 16:9 aspect ratio. So if you select this, whatever rectangle you draw, as you draw it, as you select it, it will maintain that aspect ratio as you adjust the size. If you're doing a fixed width, you will be listing its size in pixels, or you can change that to a different unit of measurement. And the same goes for height. And then for size, it will be a height and then a width. So if you go with fixed size, no matter what you do, how you draw this, it will always be the same size. The same sort of goes for the ellipse select tool. If you want to draw a perfect circle, you would obviously have a 1:1 ratio to create a square. If you remove your fixed ratio, you can then stretch that out into an oval and all the other kinds of elliptical shapes. You won't really work with this too much though. You have the lasso select tool or freehand select tool, where you can draw any geometric shape and close the shape and create a selection there. You have what is called the fuzzy select tool that selects by color. So if you had a photographic image and you wanted to select all of a specific color within a region, you would use this tool. It looks like a little magic wand, and it will select all the pixels that are of a certain color that are connected. It doesn't select for the entire image, but you can change that within the settings. But this isn't really something that will be used for the kind of work we do. The select by color tool works in a similar function. The move tool will be used to move the actual image that you're working with. And then we have the crop tool. So the crop tool will be used to crop the image to a specific size. And again, you can fix that to a specific width, height, size, or aspect ratio. If you hover over these tools, a little pop-up will appear that gives a brief description of what each one does. The scale tool we won't really work with. It's a way to resize an image, but it's not the most ideal way to do so. The rotate tool does what it says. You can rotate the image with the rotation tool. The flip tool allows you to flip the image. So if I just draw something here and we use the flip tool, you can mirror it either horizontally or vertically. Then these other tools, again, we don't really work with. The bucket fill tool allows you to color in like you would in Microsoft Paint, where you click on a specific color and it replaces it with the color that you currently have selected. The paintbrush tool acts as a paintbrush. It allows you to paint on top of the image that you're working with. And the same goes for the pencil tool, as well as the eraser tool, which allows you to erase what you've done. So if I draw something and then erase it, you can see it removes the work that I've done. These tools all have quite similar options. So you have the opacity, you have the brush type, and then these all change the settings for how the brush operates. So the size, aspect ratio, and angle. For the most part, the only thing you're going to really need to work with is the brush type. So if you click on this little icon, you can see all these other types. The only ones you're really going to work with is the solid circle and then these sort of fuzzier circles to the left of it. So obviously the solid circle, if you select that and we make the size really large, if I click once, you'll see that's the way the brush applies itself. It's a solid circle with hard edges. And so if I draw a line, it's going to basically be replicating that shape. If I go down to this fuzzier circle, it's got softer edges. So although that's more or less the same size, you'll see it fades the edging. And so you get a much softer edge. But then as you go over it, it sort of builds on itself and you can eventually fill a space completely with color. So those are the only settings you're really going to change, is the brush type and then adjusting the size relative to the size of the image you're working with. You can make really massive brushes or you can make really, really tiny ones for smaller changes. The rest you can sort of leave as is. For the sake of the things we're going to be doing, you're not going to need to be able to change any of these settings. The pen functions very similarly to the brush. It just tends to work better with the harder edges. So you can see here this edge is a lot sharper than if I did the exact same thing with a brush. With a brush it sort of softens it. Even though I've selected the harder edge, it softens it just ever so slightly. So the pen is a lot harder edge. The eraser, you can also adjust the size for erasing things that you've done. Then the next tool is called the clone tool. This is a very, very useful tool that I'm going to go through in a worked example where you can sort of Photoshop things. The way it works, I'm going to just draw a line here. The way the clone tool works is what it does is you sort of set a reference within an image. So what you do is you hold down the control key and then you click once to select a reference. And you'll see the sort of ghost outline appears to show where your reference currently is. And then what it does is it copies that particular part. So when you click here, you can see it copies everything within that circle exactly. And then as you drag it down, it sort of copies that shape. You can see on the left-hand side the like sort of ghost image sort of moving around. And it seems quite simple and rudimentary right now, but when I go through the worked example, you'll see how powerful it can be. And so this, again, you have different brush types. So you have this harder edged one, and you have softer edged ones, and you can adjust the size of these brushes as well. So you can sort of see how they work here. So this clone tool is one that we're going to work with a little bit. These others we aren't going to really work with. The smudge tool, I won't be using in any of the worked examples, but I have used it on occasion. What it literally does is, as the name says, it smudges the image out. So you can sort of drag pixels and sort of smush them out. And the more you do it, the smoother it becomes. So you sort of like can blur things out. And then we also have the blur and sharpen tool, which does, as the name says, you can change it down here in the options from blurring. So we can go to this hard edge here and blur it. You can see as I'm clicking more and more, it's blurring it more and more. And then the sharpen tool does the inverse, which sort of sharpens edges. So if we go across here to these sort of soft edges, if I were to sit here and sharpen, you can sort of see how this edge has become a lot more defined when compared to these others up at the top. And then we have the text tool. So the text tool does, as the name says, it allows you to add text to your image. So the way it works is you click anywhere in the image and you type your text. Then to change the formatting of the text, you need to select all of it and then click and you can change the font. So you type in the name of the font you want and a little menu pops up and gives you all your different options. And then here you can change the size of the font. And then if you click on the little color box here, you can change the color. And changing color of things in GIMP, there's a lot of ways to do it. You can enter RGB values. You can select colors here on this little color selector. You can move these little sort of sliders around to fine tune the color that you want. You can enter CMYK values. This is really more for printing though, so you won't really work with this. There's a color wheel here, so you can sort of adjust this and choose the color that you want. And there's also a palette where you can sort of save colors that you work with quite frequently and select them off this palette that you have saved. So there's no limit to what color you can work with in the software. You can bold your text, italicize it, underline it, strike it through. And then on the left hand side here, you can choose the alignment of the text. If you've got paragraphs, you can choose the spacing between characters and things like that. One thing to note about text is that text is inserted as a new layer. So you'll remember I discussed layers in the introduction. Now on the right hand side here, in this little window, you'll have these different sort of tabs for different things, and one of them will be for your layers. And you'll see they appear like sheets of paper sort of stacked on top of each other. And when I entered the text, it created this new layer that's just titled text, and it uses the base layer as the background. So working with layers here, there's a little eyeball. And what that does is it allows you to sort of hide a layer. So if I click on the eyeball for the text layer, the text disappears. If I click on it again, it reappears. Same goes for the background, and it reappears. There's some open space between the eyeball and sort of like miniature preview of the background of the layer. And if you click on that, a little chain link will appear. And what that means is that you've locked the layer. And when you lock a layer, it means that nothing can be done to it. So if I click on a tool, like the paintbrush tool, and I try and paint, nothing is happening because this layer is locked. So when a layer is locked, no changes can be made to it. This is quite useful if you don't want to accidentally make changes to something. And so if I want to change something, I just unlock the layer, and then eventually I will be able to select it and paint on it. Finally, we have the color picker tool. It's just a little dropper, so if you have an existing image, you can click on a color and it will set that as the active color that you will work with. So now if I go to my paintbrush will paint in the color that I use the color dropper on. There is also a little magnifying glass that you can use to zoom in and out, but it's much easier to just hold control and roll your mouse wheel. So if you hold control and roll your mouse wheel up, you zoom in, hold control and roll your mouse wheel down, you zoom out. So that's the toolbox and the majority of the tools that we'll be working with. Again, on the right hand side, the only sort of thing that I tend to work with in this layer is in this window is the layers panel. You do also have a color picker down here, so you don't have to open the little color picker windows which is really useful. You can also enter in color codes down here. At the top, you have some pretty standard drop downs. You have File, Edit. You can go to Preferences down here and Edit to change your interface, the way that it looks, your color scheme, all that kind of stuff. Selection, View, Image. There's some things in here that I'm going to go over later. Layer is all sorts of controls for the different layers of your image. This is one of the windows that we're going to work with quite a bit later, is the color window. Tools is again a window, a drop-down menu form of all the tools that we have in our toolbox over here. And filters, we will work with one or two of them, but not many. These are more sort of like artistic effects that you can apply to images. If any of your windows, like if you accidentally close your toolbox and you can't find it, then you will go to Windows, New Toolbox, and the new toolbox will appear and you can adjust its size. Now you'll notice that because I've created a new toolbox, the tool options aren't appearing here. So now I have to go to Windows and you go to Dockable Dialogues and you can go to Tool Options and that window will appear there. And then you click here where it says Tool Options and you can drag it into your toolbox and dock it there, just so that you don't have 3 windows floating around that you have to keep track of. But it is useful to have these windows floating and mobile rather than anchored to the sides, because it means you can zoom in to the edge of an image and sort of move them out of the way if you need to work in a particular space. So that sort of covers the user interface for GIMP. I'm going to continue with some of the basic functions after this.